grandmother's boyfriend abused this child from the ages of 6 through 9, 3 years of abuse. She feared what would happen to the family if she disclosed, and when she finally did, exactly what she feared is what happened. The grandmother sided with the boyfriend. She threw the family out, her daughter and this little girl and her siblings. They were immediately homeless. Without a means of support, they entered the social welfare system. The case was investigated. Criminal proceedings were begun. Family court proceedings had to be begun. And as time went on, the child's psychological condition became so severe she experienced a psychotic break. She had to be institutionalized long-term, and her prognosis remains extremely poor, the doctors have told us. These cases illustrate that a perpetrator's crimes against a single child can involve many agencies for many years. But the sad truth is that many perpetrators do not have just one victim. They have multiple victims, and they offend over time, if not stopped. Luis Acosta, for example, was a case of a child serial molester in Queens. Posing as a plumber, he talked his way into children's homes when the adults weren't there. He raped these children. By the time we got the case and he was caught, there were 6 child victims of this man, 6 investigations, 6 prosecutions. But it is not only strangers, as we all know, who prey upon these small victims. And while those strangers may loom largest in the public's eye, those who prey on the streets and in playgrounds, I'd be remiss not to point out that the vast majority of these cases are actually committed by people known to the children, people in positions of trust, that is, relatives, acquaintances, people in the home. They can be a parent, a step-parent, an uncle, a boyfriend, a boarder in the home, and if not in the home, a coach, someone else trusted, a bus driver. In short, people the child knows and trusts. They have frequent access to the children and thus make it possible for them to commit the abuse over and over again over an extended period of time. In the case of Morales S., again, a case that we handled, he began raping his eldest daughter when she was in 7th grade and continued to do so for years while also physically abusing her, that is, beating her. During the investigation, it was revealed he had also been abusing her younger sisters during that time, 3 children. The ramifications in a cost context of this case are more profound than one might immediately realize. Of course, criminal proceedings were begun, as well as family court protective proceedings. Down the road, as there so often are, there were separate divorce proceedings and then custody proceedings. 4 different proceedings in connection with this one man's abuse. And although the costs of these proceedings to taxpayers are obviously enormous, the impact on the family can be profound as well. In this case, Morales S. was the only source of income for this family. They became involved in the social welfare system. In addition, the psychological impact to the victims is profound and continues for years. ACS's role, there is an acute role where they respond immediately, but their protective services may also continue for years, as they did in the case of Morales S., remaining involved in the children's lives, making sure that they had a safe environment. How do you calculate in dollar terms the impact of these crimes against children? What's the cost when the crime scene is a victim's home, which they may well have to leave, when the abuser is also the family's only means of support, when figuring out what happened takes dozens of specially trained professionals engaging in multidisciplinary interviews repeatedly to get to the truth, when providing for the child's safety may require an emergency response from multidisciplinary teams and child abuse specialists, and when addressing the abuse, seeking justice, and protecting the victims may require cases to be brought in both the family and criminal court systems and protective services to be provided for years. How do you measure the cost in psychological terms when the damage can persist for years and be serious enough to seriously debilitate a child into adulthood? And when with damage for the abuse spills from one generation into the next as a child of sexual abuse matures into adulthood and remains traumatized, becomes a dysfunctional adult who then has children herself or himself, and the trauma spills over into not being adequately prepared to care for those children. The ripple effects can seem boundless. The number of the cases is sobering. In 2010, in just 4 of the city counties for which data was available, there were over 4,000 cases reported in the child advocacy centers, 70% of which were sexual abuse cases. And when you consider that many, if not most of these cases, involve siblings and family members, the numbers are staggering. Addressing the profound needs of this population are multiple law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, multiple courts, professionals from CACs, hospitals, mental health care providers, child welfare agents, and others. The services they render are indispensable, and it's so critical that these agencies remain fully funded so that they can do their very important work. As you explore the issues surrounding child sexual abuse, we stand ready to assist you, as always, in any way possible. The victims are among the most vulnerable in our state, and they deserve the kind of special attention that this committee is paying to them, and we thank you for devoting that attention to them. Thank you for this opportunity to address you.
Suarez?
Those are our prepared remarks, and I'm here if
We'll
the
jointly
panel
take any
has
questions.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your very thoughtful presentation, especially about the victims. And again, I'm going to ask a little bit different question because, you know, you guys are on the front lines prosecuting these cases. And it's very important to me, and something that I realized a long time ago, that we're failing as a society to teach parents about sexual abuse, things that you know, that it isn't the guy in the schoolyard. It's no longer, it's mostly the guy on the computer, and it's mostly the trusted person that comes to the home that's the abuser. And we really need to do a better job as a society to teach parents that person, whoever it may be, it doesn't have to be a clergyman, it doesn't have to be, could be an uncle as you suggested, a stepfather, anyone, a scoutmaster who comes into the home and has a way of performing in order to gain the trust, not only of the child, but of the parents. And the parents don't know that, and they have to be educated. And that's where I think we fail. So please, maybe you can comment on that. I don't know if it deserves a comment, but.
I think a key component, especially in Queens County, which is one of the most diverse counties in the country, culturally diverse, and people from all over the world come and land and live in Queens County. That non-offending parent, once they learn of sexual abuse in their household or by a family member or a friend, needs to have trust in government, trust in the systems that are in place to help them and their child. And it's things like the child advocacy centers where the non-offending parents are welcomed, and those types of services that will help us. I think it's innate in all of us that we know this is wrong, but I think many non-offending parents are just confused about what to do, where to go, who to talk to, who they can trust, what's going to happen to them if they do tell. And those are some of our obstacles that we need to address.
Have you had experience where victims come to you where they have been time barred because of the statute of limitations?
Yes, certainly. We have cases that are press-worthy, and after an offender is in the newspapers, Crime Stoppers or the district attorney's office can get calls from people saying, he abused me when I was a child, I'm now 30 years old. It happened to me when I met him in this context, when I was in this scout troop, when I was at this summer camp. So that does happen.
And I have to say, as DNA unit chief, when the backlog project was taking place in New York City shortly after the DNA data banks came online and we were testing 15,000, 16,000 old rape kits, I have in my office a list of several dozen serial rapists who I cannot touch because of the statute of limitations at the time.
That's the point of this legislation.
And the significance of what I was about to finish is that usually the prosecutors have a case with one victim, and yet you have a second victim coming forward, which is an enormous help in a child sex abuse case when oftentimes the only evidence we do have is that child saying what happened to them and who did it. a second victim, a third victim, a fifth victim is an enormous help, but not if it's barred by the statute of limitations.
Mr. Rosenbaum, can you get those numbers to me?
I can
Not
prov-
names, just the amount of people.
I
the
can
number.
provide you with that.
Thank you.
Mr. Montesano?
Yes, Mr. Rosenbaum, just a question. A couple of years back, when DNA now made the front lines in all the criminal work, was there not a provision that the DA's office, and correct me if I'm wrong, because is that the DA can actually indict the DNA specimen?
It's an excellent question. Absolutely, Assemblyman. We can indict the John Doe profile of a given case and keep it on ice, if you will, until the perpetrator is identified. There are some problems with that. There are some strategic challenges with that, but it is a mechanism. When the outcry in the case of children in particular, however, is delayed, and that's not going to necessarily be in a DNA context, it doesn't lend itself to that. And the statute of limitations becomes an issue. The statute of limitations is most profound in terms of the child cases. The legislature has extended the statute of limitations for most first-degree sexual assaults, and we have to acknowledge that. That was a very important piece of legislation. So in those cases, we do have more access to the law at this point.
I might just add that a Lental bill that you may vote on in the next week or two will have in it as one of the components a John Doe indictment provision that will clarify any existing issues involving whether or not DNA can be indicted. So thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you all very much for the invitation to speak.
Thank you very much.
Our next panel will be Lynn Abraham, the former Philadelphia District Attorney, and Michael Stackhauer, Assistant Chief, Family Violence and Sexual Assault Unit at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. Good morning.
Good morning.
Please, Ms. Abraham.
Thank you, Chairman Lento. If I may answer Mr. Montesano's question, or perhaps yours for a moment. Whoops. Just taking a break for a moment. I did the exact thing that you just asked the prior Assistant District Attorney from Queens. A serial rapist who was known as the Center City Rapist in Philadelphia, but whose identity was unknown. There were no identifications of that person. Nobody could see the person because either the rapist put a pillowcase over the victims' faces, sneaked in the middle of the night. In one case, there was a homicide with a victim. He killed his victim after the rape because she started to scream and try to get away. Then all of a sudden, there was a tremendous amount of publicity. Then the rapes stopped for a minute, and we started to think what would happen if there was a long pause between the last group of serial rapes and down the road. So I did tell the police, I authorized the police to draw up a warrant and told them to do this at my instructions because they didn't want to, naming John Doe, also known as, with his entire genetic code across the bill of the arrest. And if you want it, I can, of course, send it to you. Turned out that the reason the rape stopped is that this man went to Fort Collins, Colorado, where there are a whole lot of young college students because it's a college town. He started to rape other young women out there, but fortunately he was caught. And when they put his DNA from Fort Collins, Colorado, via my friend Stuart Van Meveren, who was then the district attorney, our DNA, which had been put into CODIS, the Coordinated DNA Information System, there was a hit. So we knew we had the Center City rapist, who's also the Fort Collins rapist. And as a result of that, he pleaded guilty in both jurisdictions, both in Fort Collins, and then we brought him back to Philadelphia, where he pleaded guilty to the murder and all of the rape charges. And he's going to serve the rest of his life in some prison. We don't care which prison. We're not going to fight. We weren't going to fight Colorado for Pennsylvania, but he's in custody for the rest of his life. So I didn't mean to catch you,
No, it's all right. Just went to another
Representative
hearing, so I'm
Montes.
just stepping out.
Thank you.